வணக்கம். Welcome to NCERT Biology Reading. NCERT Biology, Class 11, Chapter 11, Transport in Plants. Have you ever wondered how water reaches the top of all trees, or for that matter, how and why substances move from one cell to the other? Whether all substances move in a similar way, in the same direction, and whether metabolic energy is required for moving substances. Plants need to move molecules over very long distance much more than animals do. They also do not have a circulatory system in place. Water taken up by the roots has to reach all parts of the plant, up to the very tip of the growing stem. The photosynthetes or food synthesized by the leaves have also to be moved to all parts, including the root tips embedded deep inside the soil. Movement across short distances, say within the cell, across the membranes, and from cell to cell within the tissue has also to take place. To understand some of the transport process that takes place in plants, one would have to recollect one's basic knowledge about the structure of the cell and the anatomy of the plant body. We also need to revisit our understanding of diffusion, besides gaining some knowledge about the chemical potential and ions. When we talk of the movement of substances, we need first to define what kind of movement we are talking about and also what substances are looking at. In a flowering plant, the substances that would need to be transported are water, mineral nutrients, organic nutrients, and plant growth regulators. Over small distances, substances move by diffusion and by cytoplasmic streaming, supplemented by active transport. Transport over longer distances proceeds through their vascular system, the xylem and the phloem, and is called translocation. An important aspect that needs to be considered is the direction of transport in rooted plants. Transport in xylem of water and minerals is essentially unidirectional from roots to the stems. Organic and mineral nutrients, however, undergo multidirectional transport. Organic compounds synthesized in the photosynthetic leaves are exported to all other parts of the plant, including storage organs. From the storage organs, they are later re-exported. The mineral nutrients are taken up by the roots and transported upwards into the stem, leaves, and the growing regions. When any plant part undergoes senescence, nutrients may be withdrawn from such regions and moved to the growing parts. Hormones or plant growth regulators and other chemical signals are also transported, though in very small amounts, sometimes in a strictly polarized or unidirectional manner from whether they are synthesized to other parts. Hence, in a flowering plant, there is a complex traffic of compounds, but probably very orderly, moving in different directions, each organ receiving some substances and giving out some others. 11.1 Means of transport. 11.1.1 Diffusion. Movement by diffusion is passive and may be from one part of the cell to the other, or from cell to cell, or over short distance, say from the intercellular spaces of the leaf to the outside. No energy expenditure takes place. In diffusion, molecules move in a random fashion, the net result being substances moving from region of higher concentration to regions of lower concentration. Diffusion is a slow process and is not dependent on a living system. Diffusion is obvious in gases and liquids, but diffusion in solids is more likely to rather than of solids. Diffusion is very important to plants since it is the only means of gaseous movement within the plant body. Diffusion rates are affected by the gradient of concentration, the permeability of the membrane separating them, temperature and pressure. 11.1.2 Facilitated diffusion. As pointed out earlier, a gradient must already be present for diffusion to occur. The diffusion rate depends on the size of the substances. Obviously, smaller substances diffuse faster. The diffusion of any substance across a membrane also depends on the solubility in lipids. The major constituent of the membrane substances should in lipid diffuse through the membrane faster. Substances that have a hydrophilic moiety find it difficult to pass through the membrane. Their movement has to be facilitated. Membrane proteins provide sites at which such molecules cross the membrane. They do not set up a concentration gradient. A concentration gradient must already be present for molecules to diffuse, even if facilitated by the proteins. This process is called facilitated diffusion. In facilitated diffusion, special proteins help move substances across membranes without expenditure of ATP energy. Facilitated diffusion cannot cause net transport of molecules from a low to a high concentration. This could require input of energy. Transport rate reaches a maximum when all of the protein transporters are being used saturation. Facilitated diffusion is very specific. It allows cells to select substance for uptake. It is sensitive to inhibitors which react with protein side chains. The proteins form channels in the membrane for molecules to pass through. Some channels are always open. Others can be controlled. Some are large, allowing a variety of molecules to pass. The porins are proteins that form large pores in the outer membranes of the plastids, mitochondria, and some bacteria, allowing molecules up to the size of a small proteins to pass through. Figure 11.1 shows an extracellular molecule bound to the transport protein. The transport protein then rotates and releases the molecule inside the cell. Example, water channels made up of 8 different types of aquaporins. 11.1.2.1 Passive symports and antiports. Some carrier or transport proteins allow diffusion only if two types of molecules move together in a symport. Both molecules cross the membrane in the same direction in an antiport. They move in opposite directions. Figure 11.2. When a molecule moves across a membrane independent of other molecules, the process is called uniport. 11.1.3 Active transport. Active transport uses energy to transport and pump molecules against a concentration gradient. Active transport is carried out by specific membrane proteins. Hence, different proteins in the membrane play a major role in both active as well as passive transport. Pumps are proteins that use energy to carry substances across the cell membrane. These pumps can transport substances from a low concentration to a high concentration uphill transport. Transport rate reaches a maximum when all the protein transporters are being used or are saturated. Like enzymes, the carrier proteins is very specific in what it carries across the membrane. These proteins are sensitive to inhibitors that react with proteins side chains. 11.1.4 Comparison of different transport process. Table 1.1 gives a comparison of the different transport mechanisms. Proteins in the membrane are responsible for facilitated diffusion and active transport, and hence show common characteristic of being highly selective. They are liable to saturate, respond to inhibitors, and are under hormonal regulation. But diffusion, whether facilitated or not, take place only along a gradient and do not use energy. Table 11.1 Comparison of different transport mechanisms. Property, simple diffusion, facilitated transport, and active transport. The factors are occurs special membrane proteins, highly selective, and transport saturates, uphill transport, requires ATP energy. This with ending the first part video. Thank you.